The night my dad told me I was a curse, he pressed a $20 bill into my palm like a receipt and shut the door before I could ask where I was supposed to go. My mom died giving birth to me. That is the fact. Not poetic, not tragic in the cinematic sense, just clinical and final. A hemorrhage that would not stop, a body that did not recover. I entered the world and she exited it, and that exchange became the quiet math problem that governed my childhood. No one ever said it outright when I was very young, but the air in our house knew. Every room knew. I grew up inside that silence, the kind that does not scream, but presses down slowly until you learn how to. Breathe shallow. I learned later that the neighbors had brought casseroles. Those cards had arrived in the mail. Those people had stood in our driveway speaking in low voices while my dad stared straight ahead, holding a baby he did not know what to do with. I do not remember that part. What I remember is the way he looked at me when I cried. Not angry, not cruel, just tired. As if I were a reminder that never stopped reminding me. By the time I was old enough to understand language, the whispers had already found me. If you were not born, she would still be alive. If you had not come, none of this would have happened. It was never said in one clean sentence. It came in fragments, in sighs, on the way my dad flinched when someone said my mom's name, in the way photographs disappeared from the walls, except for one framed picture of her on the mantel, smiling at a camera that did not know what was coming. I learned early how to be quiet. I learned how to take up less space. I learned that grief has a sound, and that sound is not sobbing. It is the clink of a glass set down too hard. It is the scrape of a chair pushed back from the table. It is the long pause before someone answers a simple question. I learned to watch my dad's face the way other kids watched the weather. I was 12 when it finally happened. Old enough to understand every word. Young enough that I still believed adults were supposed to protect you. That day had not started dramatically. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a winter evening settling in early. The sky going dark before dinner. I had finished my homework at the kitchen table, my backpack still open at my feet. I remember because I had been proud of myself for finishing early. I thought maybe if I stayed out of the way, if I did everything right, the heaviness in the house would lift just a little. My dad came home later than usual. I heard his keys before I saw him. The door opened and closed. His boots hit the mat. He did not call my name. He did not ask how my day was. He went straight to the living room and stood there, not sitting, just standing with his coat still on. When he finally spoke, my name sounded strange in his mouth. Flat. Careful. He told me to come here. I walked down the hallway and stopped a few feet away from him. That distance mattered. I did not know it yet, but I would think about it later. How he did not step closer. How he did not sit down, how he stayed upright, as if this were a transaction that needed to be completed efficiently. He looked at me for a long moment, not through me, at me. That was new, and then he said it. He said I was a curse. He said ever since I was born, everything had gone wrong. He said my mom was gone because of me. He said he could not do this anymore. I waited for the rest of the sentence, for the part where he told me where I was going, for the explanation, for the adult plan. None came. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a bill. $20. He folded it once and pressed it into my hand. His fingers were warm. Mine were not. He told me to get out. I did not cry. That surprised me. My body felt very still, like it had decided to shut down anything unnecessary. I asked him if he was serious. The word sounded strange even to me, small and formal, like I was speaking to a stranger. He did not raise his voice. He did not repeat himself. He just nodded toward the door. I walked past him. I picked up my jacket from the hook by the door. I slipped my feet into my shoes without tying them. My backpack was still on the floor in the kitchen. I did not go back for it. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me already understood that what I was leaving behind was larger than homework. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. For a second, I thought he might stop me, that he might say something that sounded like regret. He did not. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt permanent. I stood on the porch and stared at the wood grain, at the place where the paint had chipped near the handle. I had traced that chip with my finger 100 times before, waiting to be let back in after playing outside. This time, no one opened the door. The house was quiet. Lights on, heat running. Life continues without me. I looked down at my hand. The $20 bill was damp from my sweat. I remember thinking how strange it was that my entire worth, in that moment, fit into one small piece of paper. I did not know where to go. I did not have a phone. I did not have a plan. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, the porch light clicking off behind me. That sound hurt more than the words had. As I stood there, something settled inside me. Not anger, not even sadness, clarity. The kind that comes when a door closes so completely that you stop waiting for it to open again. I would think later about the word curse, about how easily it had come to his lips, about how convenient it must have been to assign blame to a child instead of sitting with his own grief. At the time, all I knew was that I had been named something that stripped me of belonging. That was the first betrayal. Not the money, not the door, the naming. Once you call someone a curse, everything you do to them feels justified. I stood there until the cold seeped through my jacket and into my bones. I remember watching my breath fog in the air, counting each exhale like it might anchor me to the world. 1, 2, 3. I did not know it then, but that night would become the reference point for everything that came after. Every success, every failure, every moment where I wondered if I was allowed to take up space. It all traced back to that porch, that bill, that word. I would spend years trying to prove I was not what he called me, years trying to earn my right to exist. And then, much later, I would realize something else entirely. But that comes later. For now, I was just a 12-year-old girl standing in the cold, holding $20, staring at a house that no longer claimed me, and beginning, without knowing it, the longest walk of my life. Before that night, the house had already been full of her ghosts. It is strange how a place can feel crowded, even when only 2 people live there. Every room carried my mom in quiet ways, not dramatic ones. Ordinary things that refused to fade. Her coat still hung in the hallway closet long after it no longer fit them. Season. Her favorite mug stayed in the back of the cabinet, chipped at the rim, never used, but never thrown away. The smell of her hand lotion lingered in the bathroom drawer, faint but unmistakable, like a memory that had learned how to breathe. My dad did not talk about her much. When people asked how he was doing, he said fine, and meant something closer to functional. Grief settled into him the way rust settles into metal, slow and corrosive, changing the shape of everything without making noise. He went to work. He paid bills. He cooked dinner most nights. From the outside, nothing looked broken. Inside the house, everything was. I grew up learning the rules without anyone ever stating them. Do not touch the photo on the mantel. Do not ask what she was like before you were born. Do not say her name unless spoken to first. Do not cry too loud. Do not laugh too freely. I learned how to listen for my dad's footsteps, how to tell his mood by the way he closed the door. I learned that silence could mean safety if you held it correctly. When I was younger, I thought maybe he blamed the world, or fate, or bad luck. It took time to understand that blame needs a place to land, and I was always there. He never hit me. That matters, and I know it does. He never screamed or threw things. He did not have to. His disappointment was quieter, more precise. It showed up in the way he corrected me when I spoke, in the way he sighed when I needed help with homework, in the way he stared at the wall instead of looking at me when I entered the room. There were moments when I tried to be better than necessary. I kept my grades high. I cleaned without being asked. I learned how to cook simple meals so he would not have to. I thought if I made myself useful enough, maybe I would earn the right to stay. That belief took root early and grew strong. Sometimes my dad would say things that landed like small cuts, not deep enough to draw blood, but sharp enough to leave a mark. He would say everything changed after you were born. He would say nothing has been the same since. He would say this house used to feel like a home. The words were casual, almost conversational. That made them worse. I did not understand grief then, not really. I understand it better now, from the safe distance of adulthood and reflection. Back then, it felt personal, like I was the missing piece that did not belong to the puzzle, but had been, forced into place anyway. The house itself seemed to conspire with that feeling. The floors creaked at night. The heating vents rattled. Wind slipped through the windows in winter, carrying a cold that settled into the walls. It was as if the house remembered her and resented me for still being there. My dad kept her picture on the mantel. One picture, just one. She was smiling, her head tilted slightly, eyes bright. I used to stand in front of it when he was not home and study her face, looking for something familiar. A curve of the mouth, the shape of the eyes. Anything that proved I came from her and not just the absence she left behind. When I was little, I asked what she was like. He did not answer right away. He stood at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, staring out the window. Finally, he said she was kind. That was all. One word. It was enough to make my chest ache in a way I did not have language for yet. There were days when he seemed almost normal. We would eat dinner together in silence that felt companionable instead of tense. He would ask about school, nodding as I answered. Those days gave me hope. Hope is a dangerous thing for a child who does not know where it is safe to place it. Other days, the air felt tight from the moment he woke up. He moved through the house like a storm that had learned restraint. On those days, I stayed in my room, reading or drawing, making myself as small as possible. I learned to disappear without leaving. The words curse and mistake hovered around me like unspoken accusations. No one said them outright at first. They lived in the pauses, in the way conversations ended when I entered the room. They lived in the way relatives stopped visiting after a while, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to look at me without seeing her absence. At school, teachers praised me for being mature, responsible, quiet. They said it like a compliment. I accepted it as a survival skill. When I was around 10, I had a nightmare that my mom was standing at the end of my bed, reaching out to me, but every time I tried to move closer, the floor gave way beneath my feet. I woke up gasping, heart racing, and padded down the hallway to my dad's room. I stood there for a long moment, my hand hovering over the door, then turned back. I learned that night that some doors are not meant to be knocked on. His grief hardened over time. It stopped looking like sadness and started looking like resentment. He worked longer hours. He drank more beer in the evenings. He spoke less. When he did speak, his words were clipped, efficient, like he was conserving energy. I tried to remember a time when he smiled at me the way other fathers smiled at their kids. I could not. That realization did not hurt in a sharp way. It settled slowly, like dust. The house never changed. Furniture stayed where she had placed it. Decorations never shifted. It was like time had stopped out of respect for her, and I was the only thing moving forward, growing and changing in a space that did not want me to. I remember one afternoon in the kitchen, sunlight slanting through the window, dust motes floating in the air. I was making a sandwich after school, spreading peanut butter carefully so it would not tear the bread. My dad sat at the table, staring at a stack of unopened mail. Without thinking, I asked if Mom liked peanut butter sandwiches. The word slipped out before I could catch it. The knife paused mid-spread. The room went very still. He did not look up. He did not say anything. He folded one envelope, then another, his movements slow and deliberate. I felt the mistake immediately. The air changed, heavy and brittle. I stood there, holding the sandwich, waiting for a response that did not come. He stood up and left the room without a word. That silence lasted all day. He did not speak to me at dinner. He did not acknowledge me when I passed him in the hallway. He did not say goodnight. The house felt different, sharper, as if something had shifted out of alignment. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The way the word had sounded, the way his shoulders had stiffened. I did not cry. I just felt a slow understanding settle in. There were things in that house that belonged to the past, and I was not allowed to touch them. There were words that were not mine to say. There were questions that would never be answered. The next morning, he still did not speak. He left early for work. I watched his car pull out of the driveway from my bedroom window, the sound of the engine fading down the street. I did not know then that this was the beginning of the end. I only knew that something had cracked, quietly, and that the house was holding its breath. By the time winter came, the silence had learned how to stretch itself thinner and sharper, and I was learning, without realizing it, how easily a child could be turned into a reminder of everything someone else had lost. The morning of the day he sent me away did not announce itself. No thunder, no slammed doors, No dramatic buildup. It was just another cold day with gray light pressing against the windows. The kind of day where the world feels unfinished. I woke up early because I always did. Habit had taught me that being awake before my dad was safer. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock over the stove. I made my bed the way I always did, pulling the blanket tight, smoothing the corners. I brushed my teeth and rinsed the sink. I put on the same sweater I had worn the day before because it was warm and because no one noticed things like that anyway. I remember thinking about school, about a math quiz I had studied for, about whether the cafeteria would still be serving tomato soup, which I hated but pretended to like because it was easier. My dad came into the kitchen while I was tying my shoes. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter, staring into the mug like it might tell him something useful. He did not look at me. He did not say good morning. I told myself that meant nothing. Silence was the default in our house. I had learned not to read into it too much. I grabbed my backpack and headed toward the door. He stopped me then. Just one word. My name. Flat. Controlled. I turned around and waited. He told me to put my things down and come into the living room. His voice sounded settled, like a decision had already been made and he was simply informing me of the outcome. I remember the way my stomach dropped. Not from fear exactly, but from recognition. Something about the tone told me this was not a conversation. I followed him into the living room. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking outside. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a thin band of light that cut across the carpet. Dust floated through it slowly, like the room itself was holding its breath. He did not ask me to sit. He did not sit either. He said he had been thinking for a long time. He said this was not working. He said he could not keep living like this. Each sentence landed cleanly, without emotion, like items on a list being checked off. I waited for him to say something about school, about another adult, about a plan. He did not. Instead, he turned toward me and said the word, curse. He said it like it explained everything, like it had been waiting there all along. He told me that my mom would still be alive if I had not been born. He told me that every bad thing that happened after she died traced back to that moment. He told me that he had tried, that he had done his best, that there were limits to what a person could carry. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I had not asked to be born. I wanted to remind him that I was a child. None of those thoughts made it to my mouth. I stood there, hands at my sides, feeling very small. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a bill. He folded it once and held it out to me. $20. I remember the color of it, the way it looked suddenly important, like a symbol in a story I did not understand yet. He told me to take it. He told me to leave. I asked him where I was supposed to go. The question came out quieter than I expected, almost polite. He said he did not know. He said I would figure it out. He said people always do. That was the moment something inside me went still, not numb, not broken, just clear. There was no appeal here, no misunderstanding. He was not angry. He was resolved. I took the money, not because I wanted it, but because refusing it felt like another way of begging, and I was already done doing that. He watched me put it in my pocket. He watched me walk toward the hallway. He did not follow. I went to my room and looked around. The bed, the desk, the few posters on the wall. My backpack lay open on the floor where I had dropped it earlier. I thought about packing it, about choosing what to take. That thought felt strange, like it belonged to someone else. I did not pack anything. I picked up my jacket from the hook by the door. I slipped my feet into my shoes without tying them properly. I stood there for a moment, listening to the house, the clock, the refrigerator, the faint sound of my dad moving in the kitchen. I opened the door and cold air rushed in. Sharp, immediate. It felt like being slapped awake. I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me. It clicked into place, not slammed, just closed. Final in its quietness. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the wood beneath my feet. I could see my breath. I shoved my hands into my pockets and felt the folded bill there, warm from my body. I waited. I do not know what I was waiting for. Maybe for him to open the door and tell me to come back. Maybe for someone else to appear. A neighbor, a miracle, something. Nothing happened. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk. The street was empty. Most people were at work. The houses looked ordinary, calm, unaware that one of them had just expelled a child. I started walking. Each step felt deliberate, like I was crossing an invisible line. I passed the mailbox where we checked for letters that never came anymore. I passed the tree where my mom had once hung a bird feeder, the hook still there, rusted and empty. I did not cry. That came later. At the time, my body seemed focused on one thing: staying upright, staying moving. As I walked, I thought about the money in my pocket, $20. I tried to imagine how long it could last, what it could buy. A meal? Maybe 2 if I was careful. It felt absurd to reduce a life to numbers like that, but that was what I had been given. A starting balance. I realized then that no one had tried to stop him. No one had knocked on the door. No one had intervened. There was no safety net waiting just out of sight. The house had closed itself to me, and the world had not noticed. The streetlights came on one by one as the sky darkened. Their glow felt distant, like stage lights illuminating a scene I was not meant to be part of. I walked past familiar houses and then unfamiliar ones. I kept going, because stopping felt worse. At some point, I realized I did not know where I was heading. That realization did not panic me. It simply settled in, heavy and real. I was not lost. I was unclaimed. I thought about my mom then. Not the idea of her, but the person. The woman in the picture on the mantel. I wondered if she would have recognized me in that moment. I wondered if she would have known what to do. The cold crept through my shoes and into my feet. My fingers went numb. I tucked my chin into my jacket and kept walking. It occurred to me, with a strange calmness, that this was what being erased felt like. Not a dramatic vanishing, just a quiet removal. Like something being crossed off a list without comment. I reached the corner at the end of our block and stopped. I turned around and looked back. The house looked the same as it always had. Lights on, curtains drawn, warm, whole. I waited one more moment. Not for him, for myself. Then I turned away and kept walking, the $20 pressed flat against my leg, the night closing in around me. Understanding for the first time what it meant to be written out of a family, without ceremony or witness. I did not know yet where I would end up. I did not know who would open a door to me next. All I knew was that something irreversible had happened, and that the life I had known was already behind me, sealed up and silent. I walked until the cold stopped feeling sharp and started feeling dull. That scared me more. My legs moved on instinct, one step after another, past streets I recognized and then past ones I did not. Houses blurred together. Porch lights flicked on. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a television laughed. The world kept going, indifferent and intact. I checked my pockets again, even though I already knew what was there. The folded $20 bill. My house key. That was it. The key felt heavier than it should have, useless now, like a souvenir from a place I no longer existed. I slowed down near the end of the block, my breath coming out uneven. That was when I heard my name. At first, I thought I imagined it. Cold can do that. Make your head fuzzy, stretch sounds into shapes you want to hear. But then it came again, softer this time, uncertain. Anna. I turned. Elizabeth Price stood halfway down her driveway, wrapped in a thick cardigan, her hair pulled back the way she always wore it when she worked in her garden. She lived 2 houses down from us. From him. I had seen her 100 times before, waving from her porch, bringing over zucchini in the summer, dropping off a plate of cookies at Christmas. She was the kind of neighbor people did not think much about because she never demanded attention. She looked confused now, concerned. Real. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were searching my face, taking in details I had not bothered to hide. My untied shoes, my thin jacket, the way my hands shook when I tried to push them deeper into my pockets. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. The truth felt too large, too heavy to hand over to a stranger on a sidewalk. I shrugged instead. It was a small, pathetic movement, and I hated myself for it immediately. Elizabeth did not push. She stepped closer, then closer again, until she was standing in front of me, blocking the wind. She smelled like soap and something warm, maybe bread. She reached out and adjusted my jacket without asking, pulling it tighter around my shoulders. "Come inside," she said. "You are freezing." I glanced back down the street, at the house that no longer claimed me. The lights were still on. Everything looked the same. Elizabeth followed my gaze. She did not comment on it. She did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. She simply waited. I nodded. Her house was warm in a way ours never was. Not just heat, but life. The kind that hums quietly in the background. A lamp glowed in the corner. A radio played softly from the kitchen. The smell of something simmering filled the air. She took my jacket and hung it by the door, then disappeared into the kitchen without a word. I stood there, unsure of where to put myself, until she returned and gestured toward the table. "Sit," she said. She poured hot water into a mug and dropped a tea bag inside. She slid it toward me along with a folded napkin. No questions yet, just small acts, steady and practical. I wrapped my hands around the mug. The heat startled me. I had not realized how cold I was until then. My fingers ached as sensation crept back in. Elizabeth pulled out a chair across from me and sat. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. I told her the truth, in pieces. That my dad told me to leave. He said I could not stay there anymore. I did not repeat the word he used. I did not need to. The look on her face told me she understood enough. She did not gasp. She did not curse him. She did not say anything dramatic about calling someone or fixing it. She listened. When I finished, she nodded once, like she was filing something away. "You can stay here tonight," she said. "We will figure out the rest tomorrow." I stared at her. The simplicity of it felt unreal. Stay here. We. Tomorrow. Words that implied continuity. Not crisis. I told her I did not want to be a problem. She tilted her head slightly, considering me. "You are not a problem," she said. "You are a kid who needs a place to sleep." She stood and went to the hallway closet, returning with a thick coat that was too big for me. She draped it over my shoulders. Then she set a key on the table between us. "This is for the front door," she said, "in case you need it." The key sat there, ordinary and heavy with meaning. Access. Permission, something I had just lost somewhere else. That night, she showed me the guest room. It was small, but clean, with a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and a lamp already turned on. She pointed out the bathroom, the light switch, the extra blankets in the closet. She did not hover. She did not tuck me in. She trusted me to exist in space without supervision. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, exactly, something closer to disbelief. I thought about my grandparents then, about how they were gone, one by one, years earlier, about how there was no other family waiting to claim me, no aunt or uncle to call, no one to argue on my behalf, just my dad, and he had made his choice. The next morning, Elizabeth made breakfast like it was the most normal thing in the world. Eggs, toast, coffee for her, milk for me. She slid a plate in front of me and sat down across the table, opening the newspaper. After a few minutes, she looked up. "We should talk about what you want to do," she said. "No rush, just when you are ready." I thought about going back, about knocking on the door and apologizing for something I did not understand, about promising to be quieter, better, less. The thought made my stomach tighten. I shook my head. She nodded, accepting the answer without comment. I asked her why she was helping me. She smiled, small and tired. "Because someone should have helped me once," she said, "and because you do not leave a kid outside in the cold." That was it. No speeches. No moral lesson. Later that day, as sunlight spilled across the living room floor, I stood by the window and looked back toward the street where my old house sat. I felt a pull, sharp and instinctive. The urge to return, to fix it, to make myself acceptable again. Then I thought about the word he had used, about how easily it had come to him, about how long it must have lived there before he said it out loud. I realized something then, quietly and without drama. If I went back, it would not be because he wanted me. It would be because I was willing to erase myself, to fit where I did not belong. Elizabeth came up beside me and rested a hand on my shoulder, light but steady. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "There is no clock on this." I took a breath, a deep one, the kind that reaches places you did not know were tight. "Thank you," I said, and in that moment, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and clear. I would not go back to ask for permission to exist in a house that had already closed its door. I turned away from the window and followed Elizabeth back into the kitchen, leaving the past where it stood, still and watching, while I stepped into a different kind of shelter, unsure of what came next, but certain of one thing. For the first time since my mom died, someone had opened a door and expected me to stay. I learned quickly how to live in a house that was not haunted by someone else's absence. Elizabeth did not tiptoe around me. She did not lower her voice when she spoke. She did not watch me like I might break if handled wrong. That was its own kind of kindness. She treated me like a person who was still becoming one. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Morning started early. Elizabeth liked the quiet before the sun came up. She drank her coffee standing at the counter, reading the paper, humming sometimes without realizing it. I ate toast and did my homework at the kitchen table, the radio murmuring in the background. No one flinched when I spoke. No one went silent when I entered a room. At school, nothing changed on paper. Same classes, same teachers, same desk. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped expecting anyone to come looking for me. I stopped scanning crowds for a familiar face that would never appear. I learned to take care of my own forms, my own deadlines, my own explanations. When permission slips went home, I signed them myself. When teachers asked for a parent signature, Elizabeth signed when she could. Other times, I explained quietly that there was no one else. Most adults did not know what to do with that information. Some nodded awkwardly. Some offered pity I did not want. A few looked at me like I had done something wrong. I kept my grades high, not because I loved school, but because excellence felt like insurance. If I stayed useful, stayed impressive, stayed out of the way, maybe the ground beneath me would hold. I avoided attention the way other kids chased it. When my name was called for awards, I kept my smile small. When teachers suggested advanced programs or assemblies, I found excuses. Spotlight meant questions. Questions meant explaining. Explaining meant telling a story I did not yet know how to tell without shrinking. Graduation came and went without ceremony. There was no party. No photos on the front lawn. No one clapped from the stands. I walked across the stage, accepted the diploma, and returned to my seat like it was an errand I had been sent to run. The applause washed over me and moved on to the next name. Elizabeth hugged me afterward and told me she was proud. She said it the way people say facts, not hopes. I nodded and thanked her, feeling something tight in my chest that I did not yet have a name for. I learned to disappear politely, to be present but not noticed, to do well without demanding recognition. People called it maturity. I called it survival. The guilt followed me everywhere. It sat quietly in the background of my life. Like a low hum, I had learned to tune out. I told myself that if I lived well enough, if I made something of myself, it would balance the scales somehow. That my mom's death had created a debt, and I was responsible for paying it back. I worked part-time. I saved money. I helped around the house. I never asked for more than what was offered. When Elizabeth insisted on buying me clothes or paying for school fees, I accepted with a knot in my stomach, promising myself I would repay her someday. I did not know how. I just knew I had to. I thought about my dad less as the years went on, not because it hurt less, but because thinking about him felt like pressing on a bruise to see if it was still there. It always was. I did not reach out. He did not either. Silence became the agreement we never discussed. There were moments when the weight of it all caught me off guard. Standing in line at the grocery store, watching a mother argue with her daughter over cereal choices, sitting in a car while a friend complained about her parents being overbearing, listening to people talk about family like it was a given, something automatic and unconditional. I smiled. I nodded. I kept my story short. College was a doorway I walked through without looking back. I chose a school out of state, not because it was better, but because it was farther. Montana had been a place of endurance. I wanted a place where no one knew me as the girl without a family. Packing my things felt strange. I did not have much. Clothes, books, a few notebooks filled with careful handwriting. Elizabeth helped me load the car, moving quietly, giving me space to feel whatever I was not ready to name. On the morning I left, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a small amount of money and a note written in her neat handwriting. It said that this was not a loan, that it was not a favor, that it was something she wanted to give. I cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let some of the pressure out. She helped. The drive out of Montana felt longer than it was. Mountains gave way to plains. Familiar landscapes faded into unfamiliar ones. I watched unmoored. Leaving did not feel like freedom. It felt like floating. In college, I built myself carefully. I chose a major that made sense. I took classes that promised stability. I studied late, worked harder than necessary, avoided parties and distractions. I was good at being disciplined. It was a skill I had honed early. People asked where I was from. I said Montana. They asked about my family. I said they were back home. It was not a lie, exactly. It was just incomplete. I did not go home for the holidays. I stayed on campus, picked up extra shifts, volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it was easier. Both were true. As I grew older, the idea that I did not belong anywhere became something I carried quietly, like a badge I did not show. I made friends. I dated. I laughed. I lived. But there was always a part of me that stayed alert, ready to move if the ground shifted again. I graduated. I found work. I paid my bills. I built a life that looked stable from the outside. Inside, the old questions lingered. Who am I when no one is watching? What am I worth if I stop proving it? The guilt softened over time, but it never fully left. It changed shape. It became less about punishment and more about obligation. I owed it to my mom to live well. I owed it to Elizabeth to be grateful. I owed it to myself to keep going. When I finally packed my things to leave Montana for good, I stood in the doorway of Elizabeth's house and took one last look around. The kitchen table where I had done my homework, the hallway where she had handed me a key, the guest room that had become mine. I felt something like gratitude, sharp and clean. I hugged her and told her I would call. She told me to drive safely and to eat something before I got too far. As I pulled away, I realized that leaving did not feel like being thrown out. It felt like stepping into a life that had been waiting quietly for me to claim it. I crossed the state line with my hands steady on the wheel, the road stretching ahead, and a familiar thought settling in my chest. I did not belong where I came from. I did not yet know where I would belong next. But I kept driving anyway, carrying with me the strange knowledge that survival had taught me how to move forward, even when no one was calling my name. Fort Collins was not a dream destination. It was practical, affordable, a place where I could disappear into a crowd without being asked too many questions. I arrived with a car that rattled when it idled, 2 suitcases, and a list of things I told myself mattered. Rent paid on time, a job that covered the basics, a schedule that left no room for thinking too hard. I rented a small apartment near the edge of town, close enough to bus lines, far enough from anything that looked like a social scene. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old dust. It was perfect. No history, no memories embedded in the corners, just space. I worked wherever I could. Office admin, customer support, temporary contracts that ended just as I was getting comfortable. I learned how to be useful quickly, how to listen more than I spoke, how to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Those skills had been learned early, refined over time. People called me reliable, organized, steady. I smiled when they said it, even though part of me knew what they were really responding to. I was good at not needing anything. In the evenings, I walked around the neighborhood, memorizing streets, learning where the coffee shops were, where the library sat tucked behind a row of trees. I liked the library best. It felt neutral, safe. No one asked why you were there. You were allowed to exist quietly. That was where the idea first formed, though I did not recognize it as such at the time. I was sitting at a long wooden table near the back, reviewing paperwork from a nonprofit I volunteered with on weekends. They provided short-term housing resources, emergency assistance. Most of the people who came through were women, older than me, younger than me, some with children, some alone, many with stories that felt familiar in ways that made my chest tighten. One woman in particular stayed with me. She was in her early 60s, hands rough from years of work, voice soft but steady. She told me she had left home decades earlier and never gone back. Her family had decided she was difficult, disrespectful, not worth the effort. She spoke without bitterness. That struck me. I listened more than I spoke. That has always been my strength. Over time, I started to notice patterns. How often women ended up alone, not because they failed, but because someone else decided they were expendable. How many carried guilt for things they never controlled. How many apologized for taking up space, even in rooms meant for them. I recognized myself in their stories. That recognition did not hurt the way it used to. It felt clarifying. The work was slow, unremarkable. We filled out forms, made calls, followed up. There were no dramatic rescues, just incremental improvements. A place to sleep. A number to call, someone who answered. I began to imagine something different. Not bigger, just more intentional. A place that did not treat abandonment like a personal failure. A place that understood how easily people could be erased and how long it took to write yourself back into existence. I did not quit my job. I did not announce anything. I started small. Notes, lists, sketches of what might be useful. I spent evenings at my kitchen table, laptop open, tea cooling beside me, writing down what I wished I had known at 12, at 18, at 21. How to apply for housing without a co-signer. How to navigate medical paperwork alone. How to say no without explaining yourself. How to build a life when no one has shown you how. I called it second ground because the first ground had already failed so many of us. The name felt right. Not a replacement for family, not a miracle solution. Just a place to stand when everything else had fallen away. I built the first version myself. It was simple, basic information, a few resources. No design flourishes, no branding language. I did not want it to feel polished. I wanted it to feel honest. When I finally shared it, I did so quietly. A link in a volunteer forum. A mention in a community group. I expected nothing. What I got was messages. Not many at first. A few emails. A woman thanked me for explaining something no one else had bothered to. Another asking if I could add information about late life education. Another just said that it made her feel less alone. I read every message carefully. I responded when I could. I took notes. I adjusted. I learned. The project grew the way roots grow. Underground. Slow. Unseen. I kept working my regular job. I paid my rent, I grocery shopped on Sundays, and cooked simple meals for the week. There was no dramatic shift in my lifestyle. No sudden sense of arrival. That mattered to me. I did not want my worth tied to external markers anymore. Sometimes I thought about my dad. Not often. Usually in passing, a memory triggered by a phrase someone used, or a look on a stranger's face. The thoughts no longer spiraled. They came and went. I did not reach out. He did not either. There were moments when I wondered if he regretted it, if he thought about the porch, the money, the door. I did not linger on those questions. They did not change anything. Second ground began to attract attention from people I respected. Social workers, community organizers, a retired attorney who offered to review some of the materials. I accepted help cautiously. I had learned to trust slowly. Each new story added weight to the project. A woman whose sister had cut her off after their parents died. A grandmother raising grandchildren after being pushed out of the family home. A former teacher who lost everything after speaking up. Their words did not fuel anger in me. They fueled resolve. I realized that the life I was building was not an accident. It was a response. A quiet one. Thoughtful. Deliberate. When people asked why I cared so much, I said it mattered. That was all. In the evenings, I sometimes sat on my couch and let myself be still. The silence in my apartment felt different from the silence of my childhood. It did not judge. It did not press. It simply existed. I slept better than I ever had. There was a moment, one ordinary afternoon, when it occurred to me that I was no longer waiting for something bad to happen. That thought startled me. I set it aside and returned to my work. Looking back now, I recognize that as the point where the past loosened its grip. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to let me breathe. I had built a life that no one had planned for me. A life that did not require permission. A life shaped by necessity, yes, but also by choice. For the first time, I believed that what happened to me was behind me, that the worst had already come and gone. I believed the past had finally gone quiet. And for a while it did. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon, just after 3, while I was rinsing a mug in the kitchen sink. I remember the time because I glanced at the clock automatically, the way I always do when something interrupts my routine. 3:07, middle of the workday. An odd hour for visitors. My first thought was that it might be a delivery or one of the women from the local paper who had emailed me earlier that week, asking for a follow-up quote. I dried my hands on a towel and walked toward the front door without hurry. When I opened it, the past stepped forward and stood on my porch. My dad looked older, thinner. His shoulders were slumped in a way they had not been when I last saw him, but his expression was the same. Controlled, guarded. Beside him stood a woman I recognized immediately, even though I had only seen her a handful of times years ago from a distance. Ruth, his wife. My stepmom in the loosest sense of the word. Neither of them smiled. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air between us felt tight, like it had been sealed for years, and was only now being punctured. Anna, my dad said finally, as if testing whether the name still belonged to me. I waited. Ruth was the one who spoke next. We were in the area, she said. Her voice was brisk, practical, the kind of tone people use when they are already halfway through a conversation. I looked past them, at the street. A quiet residential block, neat lawns, parked cars, nothing remarkable. No one is watching. I thought about closing the door. I thought about the years of silence, the absence of any attempt to find me. The way my life had grown in directions they had never bothered to learn. I also thought about something Elizabeth once told me, years earlier. Sometimes, she said, you listen once more. Just to be sure, I stepped back and opened the door wider. They came in without hesitation. Ruth glanced around immediately, her eyes moving from the entryway to the living room, taking in the furniture, the artwork on the walls, the bookshelves. Her gaze, my dad followed more slowly, his attention fixed straight ahead, as if looking too closely might cost him something. Nice place, Ruth said. Her tone carried approval, and something else underneath it. Calculation. Thank you, I said. I gestured toward the living room. They sat settling in like guests who expected to be comfortable. Ruth adjusted a throw pillow that did not need adjusting. My dad rested his hands on his knees and leaned back, exhaling slowly. I stayed standing. We heard about your work, Ruth said. She clasped her hands together in her lap. Second ground, helping women, community support. It has been getting attention. My dad nodded. He looked at me then, really looked, as if searching for the outline of the child he remembered or the one he had chosen to forget. You have done well, he said. It was not praise. It was an acknowledgement, delivered like a fact that had been verified. I did not respond. Ruth tilted her head, studying me. You were always smart, she said. Even as a girl, we knew you would land on your feet. The word always hung between us, heavy and inaccurate. He cleared his throat. Things have been difficult lately, he said. The economy, health issues, unexpected expenses. Ruth picked up where he left off. We are at a point where family needs to help family. There it was, the frame, the justification. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, but a familiar clarity. I had lived inside this language before. Obligation, debt, what you owe. He leaned forward slightly. We raised you, he said. We gave you what we could. You owe us for that. The sentence landed cleanly. Practiced. I wondered how many times they had said it to each other on the drive over. Ruth nodded. Your mom would have wanted that, she added. She would not have wanted you to turn your back on your family. My hands curled slowly at my sides. I did not interrupt. I did not correct her. I wanted to hear how far they would go. He looked at me steadily. "You would not have any of this without us," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room. "Without what we went through. Without what your mom gave up." The way he said it, you would think I had taken something from them, not been cast out, not erased, taken. I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter. "Tell me what you want," I said. Ruth did not miss a beat. "Financial help," she said. "Support. You're in a position to do that now." He nodded again. "We are not asking for charity," he said. "Just what is fair." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the precision of the moment. 21 years. That was how long it had taken for me to be useful again. I asked them how they found me. Ruth smiled thinly. "Your name was in the paper," she said. "Local features, women in leadership." They mentioned Fort Collins. It was not hard to connect the dots. He added, "People talk." Of course they did. I thought about the article. The reporter had asked about my background. I had kept it brief. Montana, independent, focused on community work. I had not mentioned the porch, the money, the door. I had not thought it necessary. Ruth leaned back against the sofa cushions. "You should be proud," she said. "This house, this work, it is impressive." She reached out and touched the arm of the couch as if testing the fabric. It looked like ownership. I stayed where I was. I let the silence stretch. I watched my dad shift slightly, uncomfortable with the pause. Ruth was not. She waited confidently, certain of the outcome. Inside, I felt something unexpected. Not the old guilt, not the familiar urge to explain myself, just a calm curiosity. Who do they think I am now? He spoke again. "We need help, Anna." He said my name like it was a lever he could pull. We would not be here if we did not. I thought about the night he told me to leave, the way his voice had sounded then. Settled. Final. I thought about the $20, folded once, pressed into my palm like a receipt. I wondered if he remembered it the same way I did. I looked at the two of them on my sofa, framed by the life I had built without them. The books, the photographs, the quiet evidence of years they had not earned the right to reference. I had let them in because I wanted to hear the full story, to see the shape of it. Now I have. I pulled out a chair across from them and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. Not in surrender, in readiness. They watched me closely, waiting for the answer they believed was inevitable. And in that moment, as they settled into my home like it belonged to them, I understood something with absolute certainty. The past I thought had gone quiet had only been waiting, and it had finally decided to knock. I stayed seated, my hands folded loosely in my lap, watching them the way you watch a storm from behind glass, close enough to see the shape of it, far enough not to get wet yet. My dad cleared his throat again, a sound I remembered from childhood, the prelude to something he considered difficult but necessary. Ruth leaned forward first. "We are not here to make demands," she said. "We just need you to understand the situation." I waited. She launched into it with practiced ease. Medical bills, ongoing treatments, things insurance would not fully cover. She spoke in careful generalities, never naming a diagnosis, never giving details that could be checked. He nodded along, his face solemn, his hands clasped tightly together. "Your dad has not been well," she said. "Stress does that to a person. Years of carrying things alone." I almost smiled at that. Almost. My dad took his turn then. He spoke about work slowing down, about expenses adding up, about how retirement had not turned out the way he expected. Each sentence was delivered calmly, as if he were explaining a spreadsheet, not asking for money from the daughter he had once sent away. "We would not be here if we had other options," he said. Ruth sighed softly. "You have always been the strong one," she said, looking at me like this was a compliment. The responsible one. I felt the old reflex stir, the urge to justify, to solve, to step in quietly and make the problem go away. It had been trained into me early, reinforced by years of believing my usefulness determined my worth. I let the feeling rise. Then I let it pass. Ruth was not finished. She shifted tactics smoothly, like someone changing lanes without signaling. "Calvin is struggling," she said. "Your brother needs help." The word brother landed oddly. I had not thought about Calvin, my stepbrother, in years. A vague memory surfaced. A boy younger than me, quieter, kept at a distance. He had been shielded from the worst of it, I realized now. Or maybe just favored. What kind of help? I asked. Ruth waved a hand. He made some bad decisions. Business ideas that did not pan out. Credit cards. Loans. He needs someone to help him get back on his feet. My dad nodded. Family takes care of family, he said. There it was again. The phrase they used was like a shield. Ruth leaned closer, lowering her voice. Your mom would want this, she said. The room seemed to go very still. She would want you to help your family. She would want you to be generous. She would not want you to turn your back on us. The words were soft, almost gentle. They cut anyway. I felt something shift inside me, subtle but decisive. Not anger, not grief, recognition. They were using her, not remembering her, not honoring her, using her name like leverage, the same way they used obligation and guilt, like a tool. My dad watched me closely, as if gauging whether the tactic had landed. He said nothing, but his silence was not neutral. It was an agreement. I thought about my mom then, about the little I knew. Kind. That was the word my dad had used. I thought about how she might have handled this moment, how she might have looked at me now. Ruth mistook my silence for uncertainty. You are doing well, she said. You have a house, a career. You do not need the money the way we do. I lifted my gaze and met hers. My life is not in excess, I said. It is built. My dad frowned slightly, as if the distinction annoyed him. Ruth pressed on. We are not asking for everything. Just enough to get through this rough patch. I asked how much. They exchanged a glance, quick and rehearsed. Ruth named a number. I did not react. I did not calculate. I did not ask questions. I simply absorbed it. He added, we can work out the details later. Transfers, regular support, whatever makes sense. He said it like it was already agreed upon. I stood up slowly, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to change the balance of the room. I walked to the window and looked outside at the quiet street. A woman jogged past with her dog. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler clicked on. Behind me, Ruth kept talking. She spoke about gratitude, about sacrifice, about how much my dad had lost. I turned back to them. You lost her, I said. I lost everything. The words surprised me, not because they were untrue, but because I said them without shaking. He stiffened. That is not fair, he said. I shrugged. Fair was never part of the arrangement. Ruth's expression hardened, just a fraction. She did not like losing control of the narrative. We are not here to argue, she said. We are here to ask for what is right. I gestured around the room. You came here without calling, I said. You sat on my sofa. You told me what I owe you, and now you are telling me what my mom would want. He leaned forward. We are still your family, he said. I felt the final piece click into place then, the thing I had been circling since the door opened. The family does not show up after 21 years with an invoice. And AI asked them to leave. The words were calm, clear, not raised, not emotional. Ruth laughed, short and incredulous. Do not be dramatic, she said. We are in the middle of a conversation, I repeated myself. He looked startled, as if the idea had not occurred to him that this was an option. He glanced at Ruth, then back at me. Let us just talk this through, he said. I shook my head. There is nothing to talk through. Ruth's voice sharpened. We drove a long way to get here, she said. You cannot just throw us out. I stepped aside and gestured toward the door. I am asking you to leave. They did not move. My dad stayed seated, his jaw set. Ruth crossed her arms, her posture defiant. This is unbelievable, she said. After everything we have been through, after everything we gave you, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when a decision is no longer theoretical. I waited. They waited, too. The air stretched tight between us, thick with words that had already been said too many times. Finally, Ruth spoke again, her tone cold now. "We are not leaving without an answer." I looked at them, really looked, at the expectation in their faces, at the entitlement, at the certainty that I would fold, eventually, like I always had before. I realized something then. They were not here because they believed I loved them. They were here because they believed I would not say no. I walked to the front door and placed my hand on the knob. "Please leave," I said one last time. They stayed seated. I did not open the door. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there, my hand resting on the wood, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. The conversation had ended. They just did not know it yet. I stayed by the door, my hand still resting on the knob, feeling the smooth wood under my palm. It grounded me. Behind me, the room felt crowded in a way it had not moments before. Not with bodies, but with expectation, with the weight of everything they believed I owed them. Ruth was the first to break the silence. She scoffed, a sharp sound that cut through the air. "You are being ridiculous," she said. "You cannot just throw your parents out like this." My dad shifted in his seat. His face was tight now, the calm slipping just enough to reveal irritation underneath. "Sit down, Anna," he said. "Let us finish this conversation like adults." I turned to face them. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I stayed exactly where I was. "We are finished," I said. Ruth laughed again, louder this time. She leaned back into the sofa, crossing her legs. "You always were dramatic," she said. "Sensitive. Your mom spoiled you." Something in my chest went cold and still. My dad glanced at her, then back at me. "That is enough," he said, though I could not tell if he meant her words or my resistance. "You are letting old feelings cloud your judgment." Old feelings. I thought about the porch, the cold, the folded bill pressed into my palm. I thought about how long I had carried that memory without ever being asked about it, without ever being offered an explanation, let alone an apology. Ruth leaned forward again, her voice softening, syrupy. "Look," she said, "we are not monsters. We took you in. We did our best." I felt the words rise before I planned them. "You told me to leave when I was 12, I said. "You gave me $20 and closed the door." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away, toward the window, as if the street outside might offer an exit. Ruth waved a hand dismissively. "That was a long time ago," she said. "You turned out fine." The casual cruelty of it almost took my breath away. I stepped away from the door and walked into the center of the room. I wanted them to hear me clearly. I wanted there to be no confusion about what came next. "You did not raise me," I said. "You removed me." My dad stood up abruptly. "Do not twist this," he said. "You were difficult. You reminded me of everything I lost." There it was. Finally, he had never bothered to dress up. I nodded once. "And you reminded me every day that I was the reason," I said. Ruth rolled her eyes. "This again," she said. "You cannot keep blaming us for how you feel. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life." I almost smiled. Not from humor, from recognition. The pattern was so familiar now that it felt almost boring. I took a breath, not to steady myself, to mark the moment. "You came here today because you think I owe you something," I said. "Because you believe that whatever I have now belongs to you by default." Mount Dad crossed his arms. "We are family," he said. The word hung in the air between us, fragile and hollow. I thought about Elizabeth, about the way she had handed me a key without asking for anything in return. I thought about the women who wrote to me through Second Ground, sharing stories of being discarded, erased, expected to repay kindness that never existed. I looked at my dad, then at Ruth. "A curse has no family." The words landed quietly, no flourish, no anger, just a fact. For a second, no one spoke. Ruth's face twisted first. "That is a horrible thing to say," she snapped. "After everything your mom went through to have you?" I met her gaze. "You used that word first," I said. "I am just accepting it." My dad's face went pale. He took a step toward me, then stopped. "You do not mean that," he said. "You are just upset." I shook my head. I have never been calmer. I walked back to the door and opened it wide. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. "Please leave," I said. Ruth stood up slowly, fury flashing across her face. "You think you are better than us now?" she said. "You think money makes you something special." I did not respond. My dad hesitated, looking between me and the open door. For a moment, I saw something like doubt flicker across his face. It did not last. "You are making a mistake," he said. I gestured toward the porch. "You need to go." They did not move. Ruth planted her feet. "We are not leaving," she said. "You owe us, and you know it." I felt the final thread snap inside me. Not violently, cleanly. "If you do not leave, I will call the police," I said. Ruth laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You would not do that to your own parents." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it, my movements steady. I looked at them one last time. "This is your final warning," I said. My dad stared at the phone. His jaw clenched. Ruth scoffed again, but there was something new in her eyes now. Uncertainty. I turned away from them and dialed 911. The ringing sounded loud in the quiet room. Each tone felt deliberate. My dad took a step back. Ruth's voice rose. "You cannot be serious," she said. "Hang up. This is unnecessary." I spoke calmly into the phone. I explained that there were 2 people in my home who refused to leave, that I had asked them multiple times, that I felt unsafe. I did not embellish. I did not justify. I stated facts. Ruth started shouting then, words tumbling over each other. Ungrateful, heartless. After everything. My dad told her to stop, his voice tight, but she did not listen. I stayed on the line. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table. My dad looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a child, not as a reminder. As someone who would not bend. "You did not have to do this," he said quietly. I met his gaze. Yes, I did. Outside, in the distance, I could already hear the faint echo of sirens, growing closer. Ruth backed toward the door, still talking, still blaming, still trying to claw back control with words that had once worked on me. They did not land anymore. I stood my ground, my back straight, my hands relaxed at my sides. The door remained open, the cold air filling the space between us, carrying something that felt like an ending. Not loud, not triumphant, just final. The door closed with a sound that felt heavier than it should have, a solid click that seemed to travel through the walls and settle somewhere deep in my chest. For a brief second, there was silence. Then Ruth exploded. Her voice came through the door sharp and shrill, bouncing off the narrow hallway outside my unit. "You think this is over?" she shouted. "You think you can just erase us? You are disgusting. You hear me? Disgusting." I stood just inside the door, my back against it, my hand still resting on the lock. My heart was steady. That surprised me. My body had spent years bracing for this moment, and now that it was here, it felt almost familiar. Ruth kept going. "Ungrateful little girl. After everything your dad did for you, after the sacrifices, you owe us. You will regret this. I swear you will regret this." Her words slid under the door like smoke, searching for cracks. They did not find any. My dad said my name once, not loudly, not kindly either, just Anna, as if that single word might still carry authority. I did not answer. Ruth kicked the door. The impact rattled the frame. "You cannot hide from this," she screamed. "We are your family, whether you like it or not." Family. I thought about the porch again, about how small my hands had been around that folded bill, about how no one had shouted then. No one had chased after me. Silence had done the work for them. I stepped away from the door and picked up my phone from the table. My fingers moved without shaking. I could hear the sirens now, closer, the sound threading through Ruth's shouting, growing louder with each passing second. She must have heard them too. Her voice shifted, anger giving way to something frantic. "What did you do?" she yelled. "What did you tell them? You are lying. You always twist things." I did not respond. The sirens stopped outside the building. Footsteps echoed in the hall, measured and heavy. A knock followed, firm and professional. "Police department," a voice called out. Ruth started talking all at once. "Officer." Thank God. My daughter is having some kind of episode. She locked us out of her apartment. We were just trying to talk sense into her. I opened the door. 2 officers stood there, one older with graying hair at his temples, the other younger, his posture straight, eyes alert. They took in the scene quickly, Ruth flushed and breathing hard. My dad was standing a step back, arms folded tight against his chest. Me barefoot on my own entryway tile, phone still in my hand. "Ma'am," the older officer said, looking at me. "Did you call?" "Yes," I said. "What seems to be the problem?" "These people refuse to leave my home," I said. I asked them multiple times. They would not go. Ruth scoffed. "This is unbelievable," she said. "We are her parents." The younger officer looked at her. "Are you on the lease?" "No," she said quickly. "But that is not the point." "Actually, it is," he said. My dad cleared his throat. "Officer, this is a family matter. We are not trespassing. She invited us in." I nodded. I did. "And then I asked you to leave. You refused." The older officer held up a hand. "Okay, let us slow this down." He looked at me again. "You want them removed?" "Yes," I said. Ruth's face twisted. "You are really doing this." The younger officer turned to her. "Ma'am, if you are not welcome here, you need to leave. This is her father," Ruth said, gesturing sharply at my dad. "He raised her." Something in me hardened at that. "He did not raise me," I said calmly. "He removed me." The older officer glanced up, his attention sharpening. "What do you mean by that?" I took a breath, not to explain myself, just to make sure my voice stayed even. When I was 12 years old, my dad kicked me out of our house. He gave me $20 and closed the door behind me. Ruth let out a sharp laugh. "That is not how it happened." My dad said nothing. The hallway felt very still. The younger officer frowned slightly. 12, he repeated. "Yes, you were a minor. Yes." The older officer shifted his weight. "Where did you go?" "A neighbor took me in," I said. He nodded once, slowly. He did not look at Ruth. He did not look at my dad. He just said, "Did anyone contact child services at the time?" I shook my head. "No. Thank God that the neighbor gave me shelter." Ruth started talking again, faster now. "This is ancient history. She ran away. She was impossible. You cannot hold that against us now." The older officer held up his hand again. "Ma'am, please stop talking." He looked back at me. "You want to report that now?" I considered it, truly considered it. The part of me that used to crave acknowledgement felt a small, tired flicker. "No," I said. "I just want them to leave." The older officer nodded. "Okay." He turned to my dad and Ruth. "You need to gather your things and go. If you return, you may be cited for trespassing." Ruth's face went red. "This is outrageous," she said. "You are siding with her." "No one is siding with anyone," the younger officer said. "We are enforcing the law." My dad finally spoke. His voice was low. "Anna, this is unnecessary." I looked at him. "This is the consequence," I said. They were escorted down the hallway, Ruth still muttering under her breath, her words dissolving into noise as the officers guided them toward the stairs. My dad did not look back. The door closed again. This time the silence stayed. I locked it. Then I locked it again, just to hear the sound. The apartment felt different, larger, quieter, as if it had been holding its breath and finally let it out. I walked to the kitchen and sat at the table. The overhead light hummed softly. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the folded bill. The $20 bill was worn thin, the edges soft from years of being handled, unfolded, refolded. I had kept it without quite knowing why. Proof, maybe. Or a reminder. I laid it flat on the table and looked at it. For the first time, I did not feel the familiar weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. The idea that I needed to live well to justify surviving, to compensate for my mom's death. That belief had shaped so many of my choices. The overachievement, the silence, the need to be useful. It was gone. Not dramatically, not with relief, just gone. Like a coat I had forgotten I was wearing until someone took it off. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Daniel Moore's contact, my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "Anna, he said. Everything is okay. I told him what happened. I kept it simple. The visit, the refusal to leave, the police. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, I am glad you called them. I exhaled slowly. I want to set boundaries, I said. Legal ones. He hummed thoughtfully. We can do that. I told him my terms. I did not want to sue. Not unless they continued. I wanted a formal cease and desist. I wanted documentation. And I wanted to explore a restraining order. Why? He asked gently. Because I felt threatened, I said. Not by my dad, by his wife. That makes sense, he said. We will proceed carefully. When I hung up, the apartment was completely quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. I folded the bill once more and slipped it back into my wallet. I did not tear it. I did not burn it. It no longer had power over me. I walked to the door one last time, checked the lock, and placed the key on the small tray by the wall. Then I picked it up again and held it in my palm, feeling its weight. This time, it belonged to me. I stood there longer than I expected, key warm in my palm, listening as the quiet settled into the corners of the apartment. Not the brittle quiet that follows shouting, the kind that feels like it might crack if you breathe wrong. This was different. It had weight. It stayed. It did not ask anything of me. When I finally moved, it was not because the silence pushed me. It was because I was ready to live inside it. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Light slipped through the blinds in narrow bands and laid itself across the floor. The coffee maker hummed like it always had. Outside, a delivery truck idled. Someone laughed on the sidewalk. The world kept its schedule. That, more than anything, told me I had done the right thing. I showered, dressed, and sat at the small desk by the window where I kept the papers that mattered. Not the sentimental ones, the practical ones. Insurance, contracts, the documents that make a life legible to institutions that do not care about. Context. I lined them up neatly, the way I always did when I needed to think clearly. Daniel Moore's email waited in my inbox. Calm, clear, attachments included. I opened the files one by one and read them carefully. Cease and desist language. Formal notice. Boundaries written in ink instead of emotion. The words were clean and unambiguous. They did not argue. They did not apologize. They simply stated what was allowed and what was not. I signed where indicated and initiated where required. Each stroke of the pen felt precise, almost surgical. At no point did my hand hesitate. That surprised me too. Later that afternoon, I drove to Daniel's office. The building was unremarkable, brick and glass tucked between a dental practice and a small accounting firm. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper, the kind of place where nothing dramatic happened. And that was the point. Daniel greeted me with a nod and a look that held no judgment, just professionalism. We sat across from each other at a table scarred by years of use. He slid a folder toward me. Temporary restraining order paperwork. Not dramatic, not vengeful, protective. Based on what you described, he said, this is reasonable, especially given the escalation from his wife. I nodded, especially her. We reviewed timelines, locations, language. He asked if I wanted to include the incident from when I was 12. The porch, the bill, the door. I paused, then shook my head. No, not because it did not matter. Because I did not need it to matter anymore. This is about now, I said. He smiled slightly. That is usually the clearest approach. When I left his office, the sun was low and bright, catching the tops of cars in the parking lot. I sat in my driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine and let the warmth rest on my face. There was a lightness in my chest that did not feel like joy or relief. It felt like alignment. For years, silence had meant something else to me. It had meant punishment, withdrawal, the sharp edge of being ignored. I had learned early that quiet could be a weapon, that it could erase you without leaving a mark anyone else could see. I had spent a long time believing that if I stayed quiet enough, good enough, useful enough, someone would eventually turn around and notice. That love might arrive late, but still arrive. But silence could also be chosen. At home, I opened the small wooden box I kept on the top shelf of the closet. Inside were things I did not look at often. A pressed leaf from Montana, brittle and pale. A folded note from Elizabeth written in careful handwriting. A photograph of my mom I barely remembered but carried anyway. Her smile caught mid-moment like she was about to say something important. I took out the $20 bill. It was soft from years of being folded and unfolded. Edges rounded. Ink faded in places where my fingers had rested too long. I smoothed it flat and placed it inside the box before closing the lid. Not as an offering, not as a wound, as evidence. I did not feel angry doing it. I did not feel sad either. It was simply time for it to rest, to become part of the record instead of a burden I carried. Over the next few days, messages arrived and went unanswered. Numbers I did not recognize. Emails that said very little, but implied a great deal. Concern dressed up as obligation. Nostalgia repackaged as entitlement. I forwarded them to Daniel and did not read them again. The restraining order was granted without ceremony. Paperwork filed. Records updated. No courtroom drama. No speeches. No one asked me to explain myself. Just consequences. One evening, Elizabeth called. She asked how I was. The way people do when they already know the answer might be complicated. I told her the truth, that I was okay. Those things were quiet. She paused and then said she was proud of me. Not loudly, not like a celebration, just matter of fact, as if it were the most reasonable conclusion. That meant more than she knew. I slept better after that. Not perfectly, but deeper. The dreams changed. Fewer closed doors. Fewer voices calling my name and then disappearing when I turned around. I still dreamed, but the endings shifted. I woke up in rooms with windows. I woke up knowing where I was. I started noticing small things again. The way the air smelled after rain. The sound of my own footsteps in the morning. The way sunlight pooled on the kitchen counter by late afternoon. Ordinary details I had been too braced to register before. The guilt that had once driven me did not return. I waited for it, almost. The old reflex to prove something. To earn my place in the world. It had been my engine for so long that its absence felt strange. It never showed up. One night, as I was washing dishes, I realized something quietly profound. I did not need forgiveness. Not from my dad. Not from his wife. Not from anyone who had decided my existence required justification. Because I had never been the one who needed absolution. That understanding did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived like a settled thought. Solid. Unmovable. It rearranged things without making noise. I finished the dishes and turned off the light. In the weeks that followed, my life resumed its shape. Work, meetings, emails from women who had found second ground and recognized themselves in its pages. They wrote from kitchen tables and hospital waiting rooms, from small apartments and long marriages that had narrowed instead of widened. I answered when I could. I listened when it mattered. I did not rush to fix what could not be fixed. I did not confuse presence with responsibility. Silence, I learned, was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of choice. I could choose who had access, who spoke into my life, who stayed. For the first time, that choice belonged entirely to me. One evening, I stood at my front door with my hand resting on the frame and felt the quiet hum of the building around me. Pipes settling, a television murmuring somewhere below. Safe. Ordinary. Mine. I did not feel like a curse. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of a story written by others, and into one she was allowed to keep. The life I built did not disappear when the noise stopped. It stayed. That realization did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small and unremarkable, the way real change usually does. The first clear sign came on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that makes you aware of how much space your thoughts take up when nothing interrupts them. I was standing at the kitchen counter rinsing a mug when I heard a soft knock at the door. Not urgent, not demanding, just a present. When I opened it, Eleanor stood there with a single suitcase and an expression that looked almost apologetic, like she was worried she might be asking for too much simply by existing in my heart's doorway. "I hope this is still okay," she said. It was more than okay. It was right. She had been calling the guest room temporarily for months, always with a half smile, always with an exit ready in case I changed my mind. But the house had already been decided for us. Her books were on the shelf next to mine. Her shoes sat by the door, paired neatly with my own. The spare toothbrush in the bathroom had long stopped feeling spare. The space had adjusted itself around her without asking permission. That was what family felt like when it was chosen. Eleanor moved in the way she did everything else. Quietly. She woke early and made coffee before I was out of bed. She watered the plants with careful attention, never overdoing it. She never asked for anything she did not need, and she never apologized for the things she did. Some nights we sat at the table long after dinner, talking about nothing that required fixing. The weather, a book she was halfway through, a woman who had written to Second Ground asking if it was too late to start, over at 60. I told her it never was. She nodded like she already knew that, but needed to hear it anyway. The project grew in ways I had not planned. Not louder, wider. At first, it was women close to my age. Then older. Women who had spent decades holding families together, only to be quietly pushed aside when they became inconvenient. Daughters who had been blamed for things they could not control. Wives who had been discarded when they stopped being useful. Mothers who had outlived their perceived value in homes that measured love in sacrifice. Their stories were different, but the shape of them was the same. We created a program specifically for them. Practical help, legal referrals, guidance on housing, finances, and boundaries. Most importantly, a place to sit and speak without being interrupted or corrected or minimized. I watched Eleanor read through one of the letters one afternoon, her hands steady, her face softening as she reached the end. "They sound like you," she said gently. I nodded. "And like you." One afternoon, while organizing old files in the back of the closet, I found the medical report from the hospital where my mom died. I had kept it sealed for years, the envelope yellowed at the edges, tucked behind documents that felt safer to look at. This time, I opened it. The language was clinical, detached. Complications following childbirth. Unpredictable. Not preventable. No drama. No blame, just facts laid out in careful, impersonal sentences. I read it twice. Nothing in it said my name. The realization landed slowly, settling into places that had been tight for so long I had forgotten they could loosen. My mom had not died because I was born. She had died because bodies are fragile and medicine has limits. That truth did not rewrite the past. It did not soften the loss. But it released me from a sentence I had been carrying since childhood. I did not feel anger toward my dad when I thought of him after that. I felt distant, the kind that allows things to exist without demanding engagement, without requiring resolution. He no longer had the authority to define me. Not then, not now. Eleanor noticed the shift before I did. "You are lighter," she said one evening as we folded laundry together, the steady rhythm of it filling the room. I smiled. I think I finally stopped apologizing to ghosts. The house settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee shared in companionable silence. Afternoons filled with work and emails and planning sessions. Evenings spent reading side by side or watching whatever happened to catch our attention. Sometimes silence filled the space between us, comfortable and unremarkable. That was the difference. Silence was no longer punishment. It was peace. Second Ground held its first in-person workshop for women over 50 that night fall. The room was full. Folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. Coffee that had gone cold long before anyone remembered to drink it. Conversations that mattered more than the setting ever could. I stood at the front and told my story without drama, without embellishment. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush the hard parts. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They sat with it. I let them. Then a woman in the back spoke. She said she had spent 40 years trying to earn a place at a table that kept moving just out of reach. Another said she thought strength meant staying until it hurt less. We talked until the building staff had to remind us they were closing. Driving home that night, the road quiet and familiar beneath my tires, I realized something else had changed. I was no longer telling my story to prove anything. I was telling it to leave a trail, something others could follow if they needed to. At home, Eleanor was waiting up, a blanket draped over her shoulders, a book resting closed in her lap. "How did it go?" she asked. I told her the truth. It mattered. She smiled, soft and certain. "Then it is enough." Months passed. Seasons shifted. The restraining order expired quietly. No attempts were made to contact me again. No letters, no calls, no sudden appearances. I did not feel relieved when I noticed. I felt confirmation. One evening, as I locked the door, the key heavy in my hand, I thought about that porch from years ago, the cold, the folded bill pressed into my palm like a verdict. I no longer needed to revisit it to understand myself. That chapter was closed not because it had been forgiven, but because it no longer governed the story. The life that stayed was not loud. It did not announce itself or demand recognition. It was built from mornings that felt safe and nights that ended without dread. From work that meant something and people who did not ask me to justify my place among them. Family was not a debt. It was a choice, and I had finally chosen myself. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.